pleasure to welcome you, those of you who are not Howardites or Bison, to welcome you to Howard University for our event this afternoon. We are providing, I guess, a roundtable discussion on the African Diaspora Investment and Development Act, draft legislation that is before Congress, and really trying to unpack what that entails and provide, I guess, a critical but also optimistic lens in terms of what may be the opportunities that are presented with this new legislation. So we're delighted to have our guests with us today. This is we're live streaming this, we'll have a record of it, which is great, because I think we're gonna have a really fruitful discussion. The plan is to really bring Howard faculty and students in conversation with those who are actually the architects of this legislation. So we're relying on some of our graduate students in particular to come up and to really lead us in a robust conversation. But before we get started, I'm going to invite Provost Anthony Buto, who's Provost at Howard University, to please come up and give welcome remarks on behalf of the university. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly my pleasure to bring greetings and welcome on behalf of the entire university. This is certainly an important topic. I want to first thank Professor Johnson and the Center for African Studies and her team for continuing to convene important and critical conversations such as the one that is going to take place this afternoon. I know that fortunately Representative Cherfilus-McCormick was not going to be able to join us today, but I expect that this will still be an engaging discussion and conversation, and I'm appreciative for this opportunity for our graduate students to be able to engage with key experts. We know that Africa is the fastest growing continent in the world. If you look at the economies of continents globally, there's huge opportunity for engagement with various African countries and throughout the continent. And so this is something that Howard is vested in as an institution. We're an international institution. We have students from throughout the world, and primarily from the US, Africa, and the Caribbean, throughout the African diaspora. And we also have faculty and staff from the continent who are very invested in this and other topics. And so it's my pleasure again to bring greetings, and I look forward to hearing an engaging conversation. Thank you.
Thank you again, Provost. Provost has always been, and his office has always been, such a supporter of the work that we do at the center, and of course other units on campus as well. So very happy to have you here as always. So as I said, I just want to give a few introductory or preliminary remarks on this roundtable and the discussion that we're going to hold before I introduce our speakers to come in and present to us as well. So we're excited really to be hosting this roundtable discussion on this important topic of the new African Diaspora Investment and Development Act. The legislation was introduced by Congresswoman Cherfilus-McCormick. Sorry for the hiccup there. She's a congresswoman from Florida, representative from Florida, and she introduced the legislation alongside Congressman Jonathan Jackson of Illinois in July of this year. So rather recent legislation. The legislation has been heralded as innovative and forward-looking as it outlines a new framework for U.S.-African engagement that centers the role of diaspora populations as long-term investors and partners in African development. The new proposed legislation is instructive and timely for several reasons. Firstly, it recognizes and anticipates the impact of important demographic changes in the United States, whereby new African immigrants comprise the fastest growing demographic within the African American population. Over 10%, or roughly 5 million Black people in the United States were born in a different country. This is the data as of a few years ago. And this is up from only 3% in 1980. So this is a trend which is growing, not decreasing. And the US Census Bureau projects that by 2060, that number will increase to almost 10 million, or double the current level. So this trend has led to a greater Africanization, if you will, or diasporization of the US Black population. And we certainly see this even here at Howard University and other HBCUs, where the diversity of the Black population here is increasing considerably. And we see greater and increasing interest and engagement with Africa and with African issues. An example of this is the popularity of our African languages program here at Howard. You'll be very pleased and surprised to hear that we have over 600 students at Howard this semester alone who are studying 8 African languages. And many of them are heritage learners, but many of them are not heritage learners. Many of them are also from Afro-Caribbeans or from the older diaspora. So these demographic shifts and the growth of new African diaspora communities are also leading to growing political awareness and mobilization within the African diaspora. And we've seen many examples of the African diaspora flexing its political clout in state and local elections, the formation of African diaspora commissions, and even the Presidential Commission on African Diaspora Engagement that was created under the Biden administration. It is also increasingly recognized that the African diaspora has played a formidable role through the practice of remittances, often sent directly to millions of African families. These remittances are one of the continent's main sources of foreign currency and consistently surpass annual foreign direct investments by the global north. It is estimated that the African diaspora sends to Africa over $100 billion in annual remittances. And undeclared and or informal transfers could increase that figure even more. The AIDA legislation offers a framework and tools to convert such uncoordinated, if you will, African diaspora investments into planned and strategic investment. It is timely, given the dismantling of older global development frameworks and traditional aid models. Yet, its future is uncertain, given the current political climate, the exodus of African diaspora voices in policy-making platforms, and the genuflecting of the Republican-led Congress on budget matters to the executive branch. On the other hand, the U.S. International DFC, Development Finance Corporation, I always get the acronyms wrong, appears alive and well for business with Africa, is what I hear. But what will be the diaspora influence in shaping the types of projects the DFC is prepared to fund? In other words, there are many unknowns, and thus we're delighted to have experts with us this afternoon to be able to hopefully fill in some of the gaps and give us the most up-to-date information on the status of the legislation. So I'm delighted to have with us today two of the kind of brains and architects in many ways behind this piece of legislation. Our first speaker will be Ms. Angèle Quément, who is Deputy Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick. She has worked for many years as legislative counsel for several members of Congress. Ms. Quément also served as President and CEO of Astrategic Group, which is a consulting firm that provides international trade, advisory, and strategic services to multidimensional entities willing to engage with Africa and emerging markets. She holds a bachelor's in law and an LLM degree in economic activity law from the University of I'm sorry, my French, it's in France, and so I've totally butchered that name. I apologize, and you gave it to me before. She also holds an LLM degree in international business transactions and human rights law from Washington College of Law at American University here in Washington, D.C. So I'll invite Ms. Cuomo to speak first, but before I do, let me just actually introduce, I think I'll just quickly now introduce our second expert speaker, who we're delighted to also welcome to Howard University, Mr. Eric Richard. Mr. Richard is founder and CEO of Homestrings.com or Homestrings, a global diaspora investment and research firm. Prior to Homestrings, Mr. Richard founded Gravitas Capital, an LLC, a sovereign wealth advisory firm with over $2 billion in mandates, US dollars in mandates. Before that, Richard was on staff at the World Bank. He's a graduate of Cheikh Anta Diop University in Dakar, Senegal, a graduate of, oh dear, here I go again, Duquesne University, and a World Bank Scholar and a Harvard Fellowship awardee at Harvard School of Business. So we're delighted to have both of you here joining us today. The format for today is I will invite Ms. Cuomo to come speak, followed by Mr. Richard. Then we'll have a short discussion or roundtable with our three graduate students, and then invite you back to basically join the conversation, because we have many questions that we would like to present to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Congo. Thank you very much, Mrs. Johnson. It's a great privilege for me to come here at Howard University. As late Nadina used to say, in the world is only two universities. Harvard and Howard. So the Congresswoman would love to be here. But unfortunately, these are very difficult times. She was in DC, as I told you yesterday, and she had to fly back to the district for our emergency meeting. So, I don't know what else I should add on what she just said on the diaspora framework. What I can maybe start the conversation with, how much time do you have first?
10, 15 minutes.
I can be like in my class, while I believe I was a pastor or a teacher. Okay, 20. That's what my kids always tell me. So let's say I will do 5 and know that I will probably extend it to 25. And I'm African. If you give it back to an African, hold your seat for 45 minutes.
Get comfortable.
So, African diaspora. You know, when the African Union, just to give you a little bit background how AIDA legislation came about, when the African Union decided to create 6 regions and divide the 6 regions as of any African descending outside of the United States. It was 2003, I believe. It became clear to us policymakers in Washington, D.C., that this is the beginning of the framework. So when President Obama won the election in 2005, I was the counsel for Congressman Bobby Rush. He was the lead Democrat of the Trade and Consumer Protection Subcommittee and the Energy and Commerce Committee, who has jurisdiction over export. So he called all of us. Umubal is here in the room, Hegi Shah was here, all of the diaspora leaders after the campaign, and he said, okay, people, listen, now we have an African diaspora president. I hope you all will be disappointed from day one. He cannot deliver for all the communities. He is representing the United States. So, but you will be judged His term will be determined by what you are able to give him. Nobody will judge President Obama, but you will be judged on what you've done in President Obama's time. So we got together and started brainstorming what we need to do with diaspora, how you can turn the diaspora, change the diaspora from Obama into something tangible. And we came with the first diaspora legislation. It was still called AIDA. AIDA looks like means mother in Swahili, African Investment in Diaspora Act. So we dropped the first language of African diaspora, asking the White House to have diaspora office. The first reaction was, no, we cannot do it by White House because it was security related. Maybe you should do the State Department. That was the first objection. The second objection is, no, why are you doing an African diaspora? Yes, we have an African president, but what about the rest? So we were very intentional on keeping African diaspora legislation, despite the fact that it was unfair to other communities. So, so young Africans like you now went online and did a campaign, watching for AIDA campaign. In 1 week, we have 1,000 members from Facebook, from Canada, from France, everywhere, within the diaspora. So they make so much noise that because the congressman told us, Angel, to exercise change, it's not just passing the decision. The decision is just the beginning. You create a conversation and something will happen. So what happened was the State Department created AIDA, International Diaspora Engagement, like a big conference where there are people coming from Macedonia, Indian American, Chinese American, all the diaspora ethnicity under one group at State Department once a year. That was the beginning. Then things evolved. The diaspora kept being more and more organized. And then when President Obama, Biden, when he campaigned, the diaspora working group, particularly language, and the recommendation we gave to President Biden was to have a diaspora initiative. So the year later, the legislation became a resolution, executive order, he created diaspora engagement office. So that's the big story, the progression of how sometimes, I'm just saying that because I'm talking to the youth, don't be too in a rush to exercise change. Sometimes it takes time, and it builds until when the right moment comes. Public policy needs to be matched, power needs to be matched, public opinion. When you have all those three aligned, then you can have change. When I say public policy before peace, is because if you're power, if you're majority, the public opinion is prepared because they're all educated. And if you have a policy, then you execute. So it looks like at that time, the public opinion was prepared to see a diaspora engagement and we create diaspora engagement office. So after that, Congressman Mix, last Congress, decided to codify the diaspora engagement, make it a law, not just a executive order. He used legislation to create a diaspora engagement office at the department to make it permanent. He got selection, then here we are. That's the decision making. Now I'm working for Congresswoman Cherfilus-McCormick, who's the first generation. So she's telling me, Angel, diaspora engagement is fine, but I need something tangible. We didn't know what, we all knew that no, dissenting would be good, but what kind of dissenting? How can you change the tax code? We already knew that we need to be the cost of remittances, because on the leadership of AIDA, who's the one who figured the information, we all knew that the OECD countries back in 2010 made a commitment to reduce the cost of remittances. If you send money to Asia, it's costing 5%. Latin America, maybe 7%. Africa was average 10%. If they all commit to bring it down to at least 6% across the board. In doing that, if you calculate from the $200 billion per year, because unofficially, you don't count the clothes that you send to your sister to sell, the computer you send to your sister to sell, the way that you use the susu to transfer. Like, hey, auntie, can you give money to my nephew there? If you calculate all that, we close $200 billion a year, 4 times for assistance. So, if you reduce the cost to 6%, according to an economist, I don't trust economists, except Eric, I don't trust them at all. Sometimes they can make numbers play what they want, but economists said if you reduce the cost to 6%, you can save $5 million. $5 million is a lot of money for women for education and everything here. Congresswoman, she's very ambitious sometimes. It's very difficult to work with her because if you work with her who read anything, it's hard. Because you're supposed to read anything for her. But Congresswoman Cherfilus-McCormick reads anything. the tweet, the report, everything. Sometimes you have to hide information because if you see it, she will call, I need a memo on this. This sounds like you need to do something. Just don't talk to me about for engagement. Instead of saying that, give me something tangible that we can link to the Foreign Affairs Committee or link to the Means Committee. I said, okay, I'm working on it, man. I'm not a tax expert. Oh, lo and behold, when President Trump dismantled the AIDA, it became clear that, okay, now, the rhetoric of having more trade, less aid, become tangible. It's painful, nobody had like that, but maybe it's needed. And sometimes we need to dismantle something to be built and do it better. So the Congresswoman does not believe in just challenging and criticizing. Don't come to her criticizing anybody if you don't have a solution. So you're going to campaign as a minority. So you're talking a solution this time. I don't know. Call all your friends. You have all these PhDs. No, when I look at the census, they say that the immigrant has the highest education. Come up with something. I don't know, Congresswoman. So we dismantle the SID. So we need to think about the new system. We all know that the foreign assistance system needs to be reformed. We all know that the money is not necessarily spent on the ground. The only agency that I know, and I thought was the best agency, was US Africa Development Foundation. Why? They had a very tiny budget, it was $232 million alone, but their money is dispenses directly on the ground. It doesn't stay in Washington, it doesn't stay in other places, it goes straight to them. That won't do for this matter. So we have to find a solution. Okay, we still need talking to people, experts, GIS, and reading all the World Bank was doing any report except the remittance reports all linked to migration, but nothing's linked to economic development. Just fact. You recognize the word diaspora, but nobody's getting a vehicle. So years ago, A.P. Shah told me, I believe it's when I left Congress 2014, my first op-ed was on diaspora. He gave me a solution, but I didn't understand. He said, the treasury, you need to do this, do that. I said, Eric, I don't understand. So break it down as if you're talking to a 5-year-old person. Still then, I couldn't understand. I know something needs to be done on treasury, but I have no clue about the bonds. I don't know what treasury forgot. When I see numbers, I have it. I said, Eric, so this treasury thing that you tell me, can you break it down again? He did, but I still didn't get it. So we are going through the memos and reviewing the big, beautiful bill. Then I got a call from a friend of mine, another financial guy, saying, oh, the tax remittances, 1%. So it went viral. So by doing that, actually, President Trump triggered something. All the attention was on remittances on taxing. You went for the detail, they were taxing remittances from workers that have permanent just resident, not the American citizen. Did you use the number? It means they want the immigrant to pay for deportation. If you can pay for the deportation, you can invest, you can spend our money on development. So I kept it as my talking point, called him again and called Dr. Roger. I said, now we have an opportunity, let's just reverse it. So the first framework of the bill was just to repeal the 1%. And everybody knows that because everybody's prepared. Okay, you repeat that, the rest. So he came up with a solution for the treasury, for the bond. He had no choice then. He said, this time God is saying to me, just write it. Because we have no choice. I have to go back to my bond. I have to save my job. So he was the commission on the tax of the treasury. He will explain to you later. Castilla explain to you what that means. And then we also look at the GFC and see how we can use that as a vehicle to channel investment for development, for infrastructure, and the rest. Of course, we have to talk about innovation because that's what the government is big at. So we came up with Diaspora language. We use the same name so people remember the African Investment Diaspora Act, and we create a language and introduce the bill. And luckily enough, our university pay attention to it. That's a big deal. For me, it means it's a game changer. Because if you manage to use it, the US has a very good number, we already have the numbers, 5 or 6 million diaspora, 23 million African American. So for the past 3 years, there's this new concept of global diaspora. That's the beauty of what we're feeling today, especially to the older generation. We all diaspora, instead also linked culturally, based on personal relation, that is difficult. Now, 10 years ago, people would say continental African, African American. Now, it's global diaspora. We eat the same food, we dance the same music. And so I'm born in Chicago, okay, I'm born in Cameroon, I'm born in DC, but my parents are from Atlanta or from Mali or Niger. So it's beautiful for our generation to watch that, because despite the fact that we can, some instances they create division, the next generation is growing differently. I don't know about you, but 10, 20 years ago when we were in school here, you see the African American on one side, you see the African on the other side. You don't have that anymore. I don't know about you, but this is not what I'm seeing. You go to club, you dance the same music. You go on travel, to do a vacation, or exchange with family, all African American have an African auntie. You know, yeah, all African auntie, all African American have an African student in their house. Or somebody, a student came from Ghana and then he came on vacation in the house. They're all going like that. So the next generation will be really integrated. And that's the concept of global Africa. So when Congresswoman decided to use legislation, we didn't see it as an African legislation, it's an African, global African legislation. Targeting remittance to the Caribbean countries, remittance to Africa. The only thing missing is Latin America, because you have a lot of in Colombia, plus in the rest. But unfortunately, we don't have that framework yet, because it's no country. I went to Ghana last year. There was some negotiation between the African Union, the African financial system, the ABC countries, meaning Caribbean and Latin American countries. And with African American was missing because they don't have any entity that's linked to that particular group. But still, it's work in progress. So the African investment diaspora applying to global African money transfer from the continent and to the Caribbean. We don't have the same issue. And hopefully we'll be able to turn remittances into investment. So 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we were going through the reorganization process. The committee under the leadership of Chairman Max, his top priority is State Department reorganization. So he did a big bill, reorganized everything, and the reason why I couldn't attend the Africa Day, because we had a markup the following day. We got the bill the day before, 2,000 page review. And I was thinking, okay, if they reorganize all that, some report came from regarding GFT, and it looked like the GFC have a lot of, no, it was created for developing countries. They invest in developing countries, not just Africa, but Asia, Latin America. But it looked like the new land of the GFC is geared towards industrialization. Almost like they want to finance these projects in Europe. It doesn't make any sense. Because the potential is not there. Those are all countries. I'm not saying I'm not going to be negative, but nature is doing its work. You grow your superpower, your own culture, and then you are emerging. Emerging countries and the world is completely shifting. So I think, okay, let's look at ways to put part of the language into the platform. The Congresswoman for our colleagues was the RLC who is a little bit Africa friendly, who we work with her. We talked to Congresswoman Cherfilus, who replaced Ed Royce. Ed Royce is the congressman who did the DFC reform. And she agreed to collaborate on something. So we decided to take one portion of the AIDA bill that created a window for diaspora investment to make it acceptable to members. It doesn't change the DFC rule per se, but because you didn't have time to educate them regarding those details. That's politics. We need to start somewhere. So we require DFC to issue a report in the next 18 months on how to create a special window for diaspora investment through DFC. Knowing that if they do the study, they realize there's a lot of untapped resources they're not using to finance African projects or Caribbean projects, and there could be a big return on investment. Just calculate if you do a poll And I believe one of those things that you do study outreach, so if you do a poll among African diaspora, and you ask them how many of them want to invest, at least 75% of them want to invest. So you have over $100 billion. You take 75% in terms of investment, that's huge. And that's free money for DFC. And also return investment. So the government made the case, they agreed. So we introduced that amendment sponsored by Kim, Congressman Laura, who's always working with her on Haiti issues. Congressman Salazar, who's also, no, not Salazar, he was Corey Mills. Yeah, he was also from Florida, who's also very supportive on Haitian issues. They worked together on Haiti, and they decided to work together on this one. This is how that amendment passed. With the side, full support of the Democratic side and 3 Republican, that's pretty good, because it's very difficult to have one. So that means you have a chance to have it go through the entire process. Convincing senators is not complicated because we have people like think tanks who can quickly give them and bring them evidence of the importance of be a little more innovative. We will be addressing trade and finance with the developing country. So I'm very confident, especially now that I know that Harvard University have taken it. And if you do what you're supposed to do, I will make our job a little bit easier. And hopefully, this is going to be a game changer. The entire of the bill will still go through the process. This is about education, higher hearing, and the rest. But you just go piece by piece, and who knows? It took about 3 Congress to get a GOA passed. So if you manage to get that DFC provision passed in 1 Congress, I can retire. Thank you very much.
So, thank you. And we will now hear from Mr. Gisha.
Thank you very much for having me, Dean and Professor Johnson. It's a unique pleasure to be speaking at Howard. There's a little bit of history. My mother was actually admitted to Howard University, but her father blocked her from coming because he didn't trust Washington, D.C. for a young 17-year-old, so she wound up going to North Carolina Central. And I also, as a graduating student from University of Dakar, applied to Howard and got dinged. Absolutely. So it's a really good pleasure to be at Howard in some capacity. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about my own personal history and how it relates to the whole diaspora movement, diaspora work, and the potential, and how AIDA and the very crucial work that Angel and the Congresswoman have done fits in the larger narrative, particularly in this context of very difficult conversations around immigration and diaspora per se. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, of an African father from Guinea, and as I mentioned, an African American mother who was on a Fulbright scholarship to learn French literature in the late 50s. And my father was a Guinean student also in France. And she had, the foresight of coming back to the U.S. to have her children, so we don't have to walk around with a long form of our birth certificates. I grew up in Guinea, Conakry, during the era of Sékou Touré, and so actually met the man, very intimidating to this day. The thought of being in the same room with him, and finished my baccalaureate at the Centre d'Éducation Révolutionnaire de Bourbonnais, which is the revolutionary school at the time, and then had, when I transferred to Senegal, I had the reality check that revolutionary education doesn't, translate into, academic standards as practiced by the Senegalese and by Senghor, the then academician president at the time of Senegal. So that was a rude awakening in that transition. But what I learned, living in Guinea, was a completely different paradigm around responsibility of citizens, the citizenry, and your role in developing a nation. And that went from adults all the way down to high schoolers. We were sent into the villages to quote unquote work with the farmers in improving soil management, brick making, construction, at the age of 13, 14, 15. And that sort of rooted my commitment to economic development at a very young age. My experience in Dakar was primarily at the university, which was fantastic. I learned that the Senegalese were very good at academics. One of the interesting lessons that you see them partying in the evening, and you forget they're getting all these A+s, and you can't compute. And then you realize when you walk in back to your house, at 3 o'clock in the morning, these guys are up studying between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. But highly dedicated people, and really unique culture for Wolof in particular. That experience added, the multiculturalism elements, which informed my own lens through which I saw and studied, development models. In the U.S., I was shocked by how open, the academic scene was. You could choose your own, major. You can, meet with your professors. A completely different, context from the French education system, which is very rigid and structured. That was liberating. I ultimately majored in business administration, and then went on to the Lawyer Business School and a scholarship from the World Bank, which was massive lottery, for me. And then there, I learned, and my lens there was how can you use these, capital markets, financial structuring tools for the purpose of facilitating development finance. And that bridge early on was a narrative that I used. In fact, it's a narrative that I used to get the World Bank Scholarship, that you're doing privatizations, but you're going to need African managers to manage these, these private state-owned companies. And that basically created the lens through which I launched my professional career. I didn't stay long at the World Bank. I think bureaucracy wasn't for me. I ultimately launched an asset management company called Remittance Capital, primarily targeted at central banks in Africa and the Caribbean, managing their foreign exchange reserves in order to generate additional returns, which could then be used for development finance, at the central bank level. That model was so successful. In 2 or 3 years, we raised about $2.5 billion. So successful that my former employer decided to borrow our business model. It is now the largest source of revenues at the World Bank, at the World Bank Treasury. And even though they don't give me credit for it, my clients, do so on a regular basis. I think for me, that experience really underscored the importance of understanding capital markets, understanding what drives what people are investing in, how do they perceive risk, and how do you mitigate the perception of risk, particularly when you're talking about north-south relationships. Africa has a massive risk premium because they still view Africa as the dark continent, despite the fact that the returns earned from investing in Africa outstrip any other region, and has for the past 20 years. So understanding that then led to the biggest discovery that I ever made. I was invited by a colleague of mine from the migration department at the World Bank to sit in on the presentation he was doing on remittances and the power of remittances. For a very long time, the development financial institutions and economic professors and policymakers ignored remittances as a factor of development, particularly the safety net component of remittances. But this gentleman, Dilip Ratha, decided to do a presentation to the African diaspora at the World Bank. This was November of 2011. And in there, he shows that not only remittances are regular, but they also are counter-cyclical, meaning that in periods of crisis in the country, the recipient country, remittances actually increase, right? You get a phone call from auntie at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got fired from my job, or, we're gonna need medicine for an emergency. I'm up on, Western Union sending an additional $1,000. So while you have a crisis in the recipient country, where foreign direct investment tends to pull back because of the crisis and the uncertainty, development finance tends to pull back, particularly if the risks are political. What is left is essentially an inflow of person-to-person transfers. And that is an important factor to remember. People who are from Africa understand the intrinsic risks that exist in their country, right? And I said it during the Diaspora Day in Congress, a taxi driver from Ethiopia understands risk of Ethiopia better than a Princeton-educated analyst sitting at JP Morgan, right? And can break down that risk in a way that an investor can understand. And so that discovery of remittances led me to take one of the biggest career bets I've ever done. I was an investment banker, clipping fees on $2 billion, living comfortably, kids in private school. I come to my wife and I say, you know what? These remittances, somebody needs to organize them, because this could potentially be the third, the third branch of a 3-branch stool. You have foreign direct investments, you have official development aid, and you should have remittances mobilized as a force for good, financing the critical pillars of development. Now, for me, as a finance geek, it's all about structures. How do you go about mobilizing small remittances into a pooled vehicle that could then identify investment opportunities in healthcare, in infrastructure, in housing, and in energy, and then subsequently not only provide this third source of financing, but also generate a return for the investors, right? So for me, conceptually, that wasn't a big deal. The question was whether you could make it a profitable proposition, and therein lied the biggest challenge. Can this employ people? Can it pay me for my time? And the big answer to that is yes. Pooled investments, whether it's from retail investors or from institutions, have administrative costs. If you're able to generate a return where the administrative cost is smaller than the return, then you have a profitable proposition. And we actually proved that. So the launch of homestrings.com was primarily a crowdfunding proposition where we basically created investment funds around different opportunities on the continent. And it was a wild success. We launched it first in the US, and then realized that the SEC didn't have a framework for facilitating retail investors investing in non-registered securities, right? So if you take a housing project in Africa and you turn it into an equity investment or a security, an equity security or a debt security, and you sell it in the US market, you have two choices. One, you can register that security with the SEC. That will cost you about $100,000 to $200,000 to go through the entire process, and about 6 months. Now remember, you have unlimited investments that you have to structure. If you have to pay $200,000 per investment, you're going to be out of business, right? That was the first impediment. The second one is if you decide to sell it privately, like you created an investment club, The SEC requires that each individual in that investment club be a qualified investor or an accredited investor. And in the US, forget about democracy. In the US, an accredited investor is somebody who has a net worth of $1 million minus the value of their home. Now, if you're going to use that filter, how many diasporans, are walking around with that kind of, net worth? Very little, maybe 20% if you're lucky, if you include the Nigerians. But, but if you exclude the Nigerians, it's very little, right? So then you're forced to make some very difficult choices. And so I said to my partner, I said, look, we can't operate, in the US. The SEC is about to send us a letter, if we continue to operate, because, we can't figure out the right formula between getting the masses who send remittances who are non-qualified investors and paying what's required to list these, these securities. Now, kudos to USAID. They gave us $1 million grant. They gave us a $30 million partial guarantee on the securities that we were issuing, but that wasn't enough, right? So what we decided to do was to move to the UK. I received an email from my lawyers that said, guess what? The UK has a fintech ecosystem, and they are favoring, deregulation around new enterprises that come up with new ideas. I packed my bags very quickly, went to London and established, home strings there. And from there we grew. The issue for us there was that the African diaspora in the UK is very small. It's about 1.5 million people, and they're primarily Nigerians and Ghanaians for the most part. I went across the pond to speak to the Francophones, and they were like, dude, we don't have the same kind of disposable income that the Anglo-Saxons have. You might as well go back across the river, across the pond, back to the UK. But we succeeded. We proved the concept that you can mobilize remittances into investment vehicles, so long as the regulatory framework allows you to distribute for development purposes, distribute securities that will channel funds into impactful investments back home, right? That concept is real, it's proven, we've done it. Luckily for me, my alma mater, HBS, wrote a case study on the struggles around regulatory and how we went around that. And since then, several other platforms have developed and are doing something similar. But this issue of regulatory constraint is a big one, because the conventional wisdom at the time is that the difficulties to channeling capital into Africa reside in the underdeveloped markets that Africa represents. Well, we're here to tell you that the biggest impediment to channeling diaspora capital into Africa is the regulatory constraints here in the host country, right? We drafted policy papers in the UK in particular. We sort of suggested and have been, raising, the SEC's name around this issue. They went to Nigeria and they told the Nigerian audience that they don't want to be, an impediment to mobilizing capital for development. But, and that came from an Asian diaspora official of the SEC, but I'm sure is no longer there. But the point is that, you could manage to persuade the regulators, to understand the cost benefit, because their purpose is not to receive, a collective complaint from people who've lost money. And so if you address that, then the concern around, addressing the assumption that rich people are smarter than poor people and can handle risk better than poor people, that dies away. 10 years ago, I received an email from Angel. Angel said, look, there's this AIDA idea. Can you contribute? And I was like, this has to be, heaven sent. Now I'm going to get the US Congress involved in changing the framework so that we can mobilize this $100 billion in a way that can make a huge difference, to the continent. Because this country, despite the current narrative, is a nation of immigrants. And the US is the biggest source of remittances globally, about $500 billion, the latest count. $500 billion flows out of the US into other countries. Other countries benefit. France, about 30 billion. China, about $50 billion. So everybody is benefiting. Africa in general, about 100 billion, Nigeria, about 25 billion dollars. Egypt is the second largest, and the rest distributed across nations. So this is important. This is an important word to address this artificial impediments. No one is saying that there are no risks. What we're saying is that the people that you're trying to protect by excluding actually understand the risk of investing back home better than people who are educated and in the top schools here. And so this AIDA legislation, Angel, thank you very much for the opportunity to have contributed to that. When I got that opportunity, I was like, we are going to put the truth on paper based on our experience. And so one of the key provisions, in the bill, basically address this artificial regulatory constraint. And it basically says, look, so long as to allay your fears around greed and unbridled risk taking, we're going to say that the US has a massive competitive advantage compared to anybody in the world. And that's, it has several diaspora. Let's take the African and Caribbean diaspora. They send about $120 billion back home. Now that you've sacked USAID, you have the opportunity to mobilize these personal transfers, 15 to 20% of which is seeking investment. The rest is person-to-person transfers for school fees, housing, etc. But you got 15 to 20% that is looking for investment and needs a credible agent. The most credible agent in the absence of USAID is DFC, the Local Finance Corporation. They survived, the initial Doge attack. If you can marry those two things using, the home strings model, you create a fund, you invite people in, they certify that they are putting money here with the intent of co-investing with USAID for development purposes. In that event, the SEC can't say, oh, you're doing this for investment purposes, you need to qualify. No, this is development, and as development, it shouldn't be screened for qualification. Therefore, it should be exempted. And there is the essence of the proposition that is in AIDA when it comes to regulatory exemption. That was one. The second one is the incentive, the tax incentive. And my Cameroonian colleague who joined the team, Roger Gentillot, we happen to have gone to the same school. He was a couple of years ahead of me. Roger contributed brilliantly to this idea of the role of the Treasury in overseeing this entire mechanism, and more importantly, the tax incentive to really get people to benefit from contributing to development, right? Because if you think about it, in the absence of the diaspora, the money that DFC receives is taxpayers' money, right? So in this case, you want to give people the tax incentive to contribute to development in the stead of the government or under the aegis of the US government. Huge competitive advantage. Imagine that. Congress and the executive can stand one day in front of the American people and say, we have transferred $100 billion worth of financing to Africa, even though, on the footnote it says, the diaspora basically have done all the work, right? And so this is a very, very important piece of legislation. Now, this is my call to action as the private sector guy. There is a role for each student and professors and advisors at Howard. The American government or system works through advocacy. I completely agree with the notion, having lived under, revolution in Guinea, that this is a much better system than the one we had under Secretary. Because you can appeal to this system, you can make your case, you can influence the vote, you can mobilize, right? And so there is a role here for Howard specifically, as the leader of HBCUs, to mobilize each individual on campus and outside of campus to call your congressperson and let them know that you are in support of this groundbreaking, transformative legislation. That's all you have to do. One phone call, maybe two. But you pick up the phone and you call and you say, I am in support of this legislation. I want you to vote in support of this legislation. And that simple action is going to be transformative. You will own the transformation with that simple action. Now, if you call your grandmother, you call your auntie, and you call your brother, and you get them involved, then, you know, the more the merrier. This is a moment in time. This is, you know, there's a saying that I like to repeat and I tell my boys. Life comes down to a few moments. This is one of them. This is one of them. You're going to look back 20 years from now and you're going to say, I participated in this transformation, right? Now, in terms of use of proceeds, I'll tell you where this money is going. Africa is in the process right now of building an interstate highway system, right? Led by the African Development Bank and a few other agencies under the aegis of the free trade zone, African free trade zone. That is transformative. There's a $90 billion gap, $90 billion gap in infrastructure building. Now imagine you force your congressperson to vote for this, and every year, Africa receives $100 billion. The interstate is done. Imagine what the interstate does for this economy. Mobility, jobs, right? Wealth. Mobility equals wealth. If I have my job, I lose my job here, I get into my Honda Accord and I drive to Pennsylvania, where I'll find another job, right? If you create that kind of mobility in Africa where I can take, you know, let's not call it Greyhound, let's call it the Orange Leopard. I take the Orange Leopard's bus from Algiers all the way down to Johannesburg in the time of, you know, in 2 weeks' time, the amount of money I'm going to spend between those 2 points is going to be significant, right? The velocity of money, the economic integration impact of that ability is significant, right? I will stop here because now I'm getting on my soapbox. You can see I'm getting, you know, told, right? But this is massive. This is important. Your participation is important. We're just, you know, the plumbers trying to put, you know, all of the plumbing in place so that we can mobilize around this. And on that note, I thank you for being patient with me, and
Well, we have our call. We have our call to action. Those were really excellent remarks by both of you. I want to invite we have a few more audience members. Wonderful. I want to invite my 3 graduate students to come to the stage to join me. So because we have an audience, then we don't have to dominate the entire conversation, but come for now. Am I here? Yes. Oh, yes, you're here. And we'll ask a couple of questions. You all have put a lot of information on Ms. Quemo and Mr. Guichard. You put a lot of information on our plates. I wanted to, before we open it up, I want us to hear from 3 of our graduate students because we're just so proud of the caliber of students that we have here at Howard and really think that they are the future, right? These are going to be the future leaders both here in the United States and on the African continent. And so it's really, I think, important for us to hear their voices. They're young and I'm not so young. So I too, but I was following you, Mr. Guichard. I really was. So I can understand what the vision is now and I can understand what the strategy is now. Let me just quickly introduce, and I will throw out a couple of questions. You can answer them as you wish, and then invite you to join us perhaps, and we can have a broader question, a broader conversation, if you don't mind. So my first student here on your left is Hilda Zira Banu, who is a PhD student in the Department of African Studies here at Howard University, originally from Nigeria, now here with us. has been working on her dissertation, which, oh gosh, actually, Zira, you even sent me your little bio, didn't you? Which says, okay, so her research contributes to the study and understanding of Africa pertaining to its political economy and the dynamics between conflict, state formation, and development across West Africa. And her expertise include policy analysis, crisis and conflict management, public affairs, and interagency diplomacy. So next to Zira is Yao Asare, who it's funny, I'm not always sure if students are international students or American students of the diaspora. I think Yao is actually an international student. Yes, that's right. So Yao is from Ghana and is actually Ghanaian. It's appropriate for me to say that, good. Yao is also a PhD student in African Studies, and here at Howard. His research interests include African diaspora engagement policies, film and cultural studies. He also serves as the country lecturers, and so has launched our 8th African language here at Howard, which has been wildly popular. We took Howard students to Ghana. Took Howard students to Ghana this summer for the first time. So we're delighted about the work that he's doing here and working with him here. And then finally, we have Ahmad Jeng. Ahmad, are you also an international student? Yeah. Well, I thought so. Well, you're the diaspora, right? You just don't know. I mean, you're American. So Ahmad Jeng is also a PhD student in the Department of African Studies. His research interests focus on the Senegalese diaspora and how they influence the politics of the homeland. He's also the Wolof instructor here in the Department of World Languages. So you see how we kind of try and do multiple things at the same time. We bring them in as international students and then puts them to work at the same time, which is very good. Okay, so let me get to some of the questions that I answered or asked you all. Sorry. Too many things here. It's not my problem. Okay. Okay. So my first question to you all is the AIDA legislation envisions partnerships with the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation to support diaspora-led development initiatives. So what do you see, and this is maybe an opportunity for you to talk a bit about, what do you see as the pros and cons of such a development finance strategy? What other kinds of partnerships do you think might be fruitful and necessary when we're thinking about African development?
Hello?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. It's been wonderful hearing on AIDA and the background and the impetus for it. I think overall it appears to be, or to shift the paradigm really from like simple foreign aid and support from individuals into diaspora leveraged development finance, which is excellent. There's so much opportunity, I think, along that front. At the same time, its success would hinge on simplifying some of the complex tax revisions. I think we also spoke about that at the Virgins on regulatory frameworks. For example, specifically by reducing foreign transaction costs and also de-risking diaspora investments. So there's a lot of opportunity around there. But of course, the fact that it's on the table, the fact that it's been pursued, the fact that we've come to this point where we're actually discussing it, it's a huge win. So it's a great opportunity to be able to discuss more about that.
Thank you very much. I'm also really appreciative of the background to the bill. I think this really humanized the bill and made me care more deeply about the bill. So I also want to extend my gratitude to your work and the passion. It looks like you all have immense passion for this work. So I'm really immensely grateful for the work that you are putting in. to talk about like the pros and cons, like I think about like even me personally, when it comes to sending money back home, sometimes I'll wait till, when I'm going home, then I'll go to the bank withdraw, because once it goes through those formal channels, you don't get as much as, you would if you get home and then you go to the forex and then you make the change. So I can see like the drive to reduce remittance costs, I think would encourage some of us to, utilize these formal channels, which would also give us the opportunity to be able to better track, how the money is moving, where it's going, and all of that. So I'm really, really grateful for that. And also thinking through, I know we may have heard of the year of the 10 in Ghana. Like we had like a lot of people come to Ghana, both the historical diaspora as well as contemporary as well. But another conversation that goes around is like, okay, so what happens when we finish partying in December? So once again, this idea to utilize our remittances for like development, I think is going to be like a strategy to get people to invest themselves in a continent beyond, the December party, beyond the December party. So.
Thank you. Okay. You have to remind me your name again.
Disha, Eric.
Disha, yes. We met at the Diaspora Day Congress, and whenever I listen to you, not only I feel inspired, but also go home and need to go back to my economic lessons. Give a lot of perspectives that are actually good for growth. In response to Dr. Johnson's question, I think if you want to move, let's say, if you want diaspora finance to be transformative, partnerships should not just be moving capital. I think there's processes, power, and dynamics. I think in relation to partnering with the DFC, which is your question, I think it's important because it moves diaspora engagement beyond philanthropy and remittances to a more structured, investment-oriented development. So from empirical knowledge, of course, that the biggest challenge with diaspora investment is actually financing, getting the money, but also risk mitigation on the continent. So DFC can give diaspora the project an opportunity to access large capital, like you mentioned when you were mentioning these figures. And like you don't mention this here, we academics will poor. We don't use to these figures. Let's go to economic school. So DFC can give that opportunity, but also it can push investors and give build confidence in the market, which is of course needed. And I think in relation to what the problem is, also which is in your question, the disadvantage of having DFC is that this is a financial institution. Given the amount of resources they have, or they sit on, they tend to focus more on large scale finances, which means they give a lot of money. So that would be a challenge to small community-led projects that are driven by the diaspora here in the US. And secondly, I think relying on US-led institutions like the DFC might produce a kind of a power imbalance somehow, where diaspora become implementers. The risk is they might become implementers instead of agenda setters, which is also important to take into consideration when we talk about partnering with the DFC as an institution.
Excellent thoughts. Thank you. My second question is, in the current era where old global development frameworks and traditional aid models are being eschewed, sorry, I'm saying that for my 10th grade son in the back who just took the PSAT and said, what on earth does that mean? You see, I just used that. What are the benefits of centering the African diaspora in US-Africa economic engagement? how might such a shift be perceived by African communities on the continent and African governments? You can start this one.
Okay. All right. I think, centering the African diaspora is an important step. One, it signals that the world is moving away from conventional aid to partnership. This, I believe, can strengthen U.S.-Africa relations. It also specifically focused a little bit from state-to-state relationship to more people-to-people relationship, which I think China has been implementing in the past decades. We know that the diaspora communities, not only in the US but around the world, have strong cultural, social, but also linguistic affinities. These are important when we think about centering the diaspora in Africa and US relationship. So the diaspora can use these affinities to also create an environment where investments will be responsive and sustainable on the continent. But I think more importantly, the diaspora also can bring the technical expertise in networks and knowledge as well, and are instrumental in making AIDA successful. So,
I think with regards to that question, what came to mind, two things. One, the African Growth and Opportunity Act and the fact that this is not being renewed. Well, I'm not sure if it's going to be renewed. But thinking about, I think that's come with a sense of worry. I mean, me being here, for example, I'll go to the African market. I know that it's going to influence the prices of goods, what's not in the African market, but also for folks back home also who have relied on this to be able to move their goods to the US. I'm curious what that would mean. But I think about now centering diaspora investment, and perhaps that's going to shift the narrative in terms of, being on the continent and looking up to the US. Now we can look up to ourselves in terms of development. But I'm still really key. This is a really curious question, and I think it's something to really think about. And even as we talk about this bill, I am also now really curious what the bill would mean for folks back home, and how they would think through it.
Thank you. I think overall, I think it presents an opportunity for partnership. First of all, the remittances, as you've both mentioned, there's a lot of volume, even to the point of exceeding, and we've known this for at least 2 decades, exceeding foreign direct investments. And the volume that can bring economically when aggregated is just immense. And there's a multiplier effect to actual impact that can bring, especially since it's often directed toward needs. Healthcare, education, livelihoods when people lose their jobs, as in the examples that were given. So really it's an opportunity for partnership. I think there's also a consideration along the social side of it, because it's natural that sometimes when people feel as though they're being asked financially for things, it's very easy to feel a bit used, right? So balancing that with social connection, enterprise, ensuring that people are aggregating around subject matter that they feel is important as well, I think is valid and valuable, and perhaps giving a voice to both sides, right? A voice to Africans on the ground who know what's going on in their country, who understand the dynamics, who understand the risks, who know what the social issues are and can decide what their priorities are, as well as for diaspora communities who want more collaboration, want connection, want to be involved in some way in their history and background. I think marrying both, and this is a really important time to do that, because very easily when one is leveraged over another can lead to a lot of mistrust a lot of information asymmetries. But I think, the act is on the right path in this process. I think this is part of what that is. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this comes about and moves out, and hopefully giving a voice to all parties involved as well.
So my last question is, so besides the institutional infrastructure, what would you say is required to shift the perceptions and actions of the African diaspora away from remittances to more planned strategic investments? I recall Mr. Guichard said that of the remittances, it's about 15%, I think, that are actually investments, and not necessarily directed to families. So, kind of with that in mind, right, what do we think, how are we kind of envisioning that, right? Are we targeting that, only that 15%, or are we thinking that we can change people's attitudes or thinking around remittances and what that entails? So with this shift, does this present an opportunity to broaden the number of African diasporas? Are we, including the older diaspora or more historic diaspora, Afro-Caribbeans, and even, not necessarily targeting Nigerian Americans for investment in Nigeria, Ghanaian Americans for investment in Ghana? What are the opportunities to do something broader and to kind of really have more global Africa, right? To really kind of lean in, I think, to that concept of global Africa.
I think this is an important question because when you talk about moving from the institutional infrastructure, we also have to take into account that the African diaspora, at least a good number of African diaspora, I would say, do not see remittances as investment vehicles. Most of them see it as more obligation. When we talk about remittances here, we talk about money that we consume to our families, etc. Now, security mentality requires information, requires financial knowledge, it also requires guarantees that their investment will be used transparently and productively. And I think this is where DFC comes in, but it's also where experts like yourself come in. Now, I think in suit, I think, to my opinion, broader participation of the African diaspora to involve communities whose connection is historical, not of recent. So doing so would make AIDA not just an economic initiative, but also a diaspora reconciliation project, which is important. Now, to move from remittances to culture of investment, we need more than banks. We need trust, transparency, and only inclusive pathways that reflect the diversity of the African diaspora. And I think AIDA is a big that is important because it recognizes the diaspora not just as senders of money, but also as co-architects of development. That is where I think it became so significant. So we need partnership that shifts power, not just capital, in this context. Thank you.
Yes, I think there's opportunity here to, especially because of the aggregation of funds from different individuals, smaller funds. I think there can be an opportunity to strengthen compliance frameworks, because a big cost for remittances is in anti-money laundering, terrorism funding compliance monitoring. It's a big problem everywhere. And because of that, there's lots of banks, global banks, that tend to cut ties due to tax regulations with smaller funds transfer operators, like, so for example, small fintech agencies in Africa. So if there's a process that could help regulate or certify some of these smaller financial institutions or organizations in Africa that could help. Also, I think perhaps mandating that a certain portion of funds is dedicated to focusing on innovation. For certain priorities that are identified by each part could be helpful. And then also perhaps, so there seems to be an administrative cost if funding, I think, based on the information provided, the $3,000 tax deduction is tied to end use of the funds, which is a great idea in theory. In practice, it would be administratively burdensome. Like, how do we apply that? So one recommendation would be to focus on perhaps a modest fixed tax credit for remittances sent through certified low-cost providers. They could be African, they could be diaspora-led, but these types of, I think, financial frameworks or operation can help both meet and serve as solutions to some of the active challenges that gaining funds from this process might bring.
Yeah, thank you. So when I first read the bill, I think for me, my response to it, and I shared some with Dr. Johnson, I was thinking about how the bill engages the complexities within or amongst the diaspora. So for example, if I'm to send money back home, the remittance platform that I would use would not ask if whether I have are you Ghanaian or are you not? Basically, the point being that remittance platforms do not distinguish whether one is a contemporary diaspora or historical diaspora. It's all seen as one and same. And I was thinking that the language of the bill for me felt like it was directed more towards, let's say, immigrants, whereas for example, as a result of the year of Britannia, I have folks who are not from Ghana, but they are sending money back to buy land. They may have made some friends, they are sending money to them. They may be just buying shea butter. Can you please take some money, buy me some shea butter and then send it. So remittance platforms are not going to distinguish, all of these. So I was wondering how, in the language of the bill, we can, perhaps, make it more broad and encompassing so that the historical diaspora can also feel like a part and parcel of it. With that being said, my research is I mostly focus on what I call cultural remittances. So an aspect of that would be for example, you have Chance the Rapper comes to Ghana because he's going through a divorce and he's invited by a friend. He has such a good time in Ghana that in a few months' time, he actually puts up a show, which was, I forget the name of the show, but he brings on Erykah Badu and a couple of potent cultural performance from the US, and from that you are seeing these relationships being formed. You see a musician in Ghana make music, and then an American artist will retweet it, and it goes through their networks, and all of a sudden they've blown out. So my research focus on what I call cultural remittances. And it's also been shared that the diaspora feel connected to the continent, especially when they learn the language. So I'm also thinking about, okay, how do we also prioritize, aspects of the culture for the diaspora to feel more connected beyond finances or beyond economics. But anyways, that's what my thoughts are. Thank you.
Those are my questions. May I invite or ask Ms. Primo and Mr. Bishard to join us? I know the students probably have a couple of my students have probably a couple of questions. I guess I'll take prerogative and just maybe ask a quick question, and then we will open it up to the audience, because I'm sure the audience has questions as well. And I think I just feel kind of obliged to ask this question, one, because we're here at Howard University, and, we're an academic institution, right? So when we're thinking about African diaspora engagement with the continent, we've talked about, kind of the economic power of the diaspora and how we kind of mobilize that in more strategic ways. But even in your remarks, Mr. Guichard, you talked as well about the importance of the diaspora in terms of skills development and skills transfer, right? And I think that's one area certainly where the universities and like other academic institutions can come in. So I know the bill doesn't, I don't think the bill doesn't specifically address that, but how might we connect or even build off of the bill or this piece of legislation, extend it even in other programs or even in maybe future legislation that might really allow us to mobilize that element of the diaspora, right? Skills development and skills transfer. Because as we all know the statistics of the population boom on the African continent. And just that the continent simply doesn't have the number of universities or professors to train the next generation, right? So how do you see AIDA either facilitating perhaps future legislation or even future programming? How might a university like and HBCUs like Howard kind of position themselves vis-a-vis this legislation or the broader really vision that Mr. Guichard you talked about?
So thank you for that, and obviously for the opportunity to participate. A couple of things I want to clarify before we jump into. So I noticed that in the discussion, there were some misunderstandings. So I want to clarify those. So yes, the 15% is looking for investment directly, but that 15%, if mobilized, can be leveraged, right? So in the investment banking space, if you say to a banker, I got $15 billion, but I need 150 billion, they'll say, yeah, sure, we'll leverage that 10 times for you. There'll be conditions around, cash flow. So the fact that you already have the cash flow is a significant paradigm shift. The idea that you can borrow against it, 10 times makes it easy. So right there, you have $150 billion just on that 15%, right? The key question is, can you mobilize it? Can you provide it as collateral? In an institutional, frame. So what Holmstrings did, which is take these small, transfers, put them into an institutional vehicle that then represents the diaspora capital that can then be leveraged, right? The second point is another technique, which also involves leveraging, is the organizations who are responsible for facilitating the transfers, Western Union, MoneyGram, and a few others. Both they and the domestic banks that facilitate the disbursement of those funds, they earn what's called remittance receipts, right? And those receipts are like they're receivables, right? And those receivables could be used as collateral to again provide leverage. But you would need to have all these banks say, okay, yes, we would like to offer leveraging against these receipts, which we own, in order to fund a government project. So on lend to the government, right? So you may have of $100 billion, maybe $5 billion in remittance receipts that the banks own. They can offer that up, leverage 10 times, so $50 billion on lend to the government at a cheaper rate. And the government can raise money by going directly into the market. Why? Because the quality of the remittances, they're constant, they're countercyclical, they are better than AAA, right? So again, so when I say 15%, it's sort of a nominal figure, but underneath that, there's a whole leveraging mechanism, right? So I just want to make sure I mention that. And then there was there was a point about, so the point about, Ghanaian remittances versus Kenyan remittances. The one thing we discovered, one of the biggest findings we discovered at Home Streams was that Africans and Caribbeans tend to be pan-investors. So, we had Nigerians investing in Ghana, in South Africa, in Kenya, we had Kenyans investing in Rwanda and in Senegal. And the driving force behind that is they are buying into the positive narrative of African development, right? It's sort of supportive. It's not philanthropy, it's actually investment. They're looking for returns, but they will support a groundbreaking project, in a way that a non-African or non-Caribbean would not, right? Just because of the positive narrative. So this idea that you have to channel or cross among nationalities is not a reality, right? And that's different. We've done work in Eastern Europe, which is the most quote unquote Balkanized region where you can't find a Georgian putting money in Latvia. That doesn't happen. Whereas in the Caribbean, same thing. Regional investors, a person from Barbados will invest in a project in Trinidad, and vice versa. So maybe it has something to do with the slave trade, the sort of common experience that bleeds over to investment decision making and possibly into philanthropy. And then last, on your point about cultural, there's a platform called Vibranium. I forget the network, Vibranium network, which facilitates the monetization of culture. So if you go into that, you'll see that. So, I can jump into, I guess, the questions that you asked.
Before I go to the question, I have some comments on.
Yes.
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 Let me jump to the question.
Yes. Is it?
Okay, the sheet, what's your name again? Zero. Zero mentioned about the de-risking and trust. And that's where the diaspora makes a difference. Because the continent is paying high premium because of perceived risk. Because, but the diaspora has a cultural understanding and they calculate the risk differently. So through the diaspora, we can de-risk those investments. That's number one. Number two, on the trust issue and on the role of constitution, part of the legislation also have a provision on the diaspora fund. And it's not new. In the 50s, Israel, who is the best example of diaspora, you can see, raised, I think, more than $50 billion with the Israel fund. India did the same thing in the 90s, so it's not new. So we need to find ways to allow African issued bond to be promoted in the market, in the American market. And that's going through treasury as well. Eric can explain more about that. There's a few examples of good work. The other example in Africa, I think, is Ethiopia, where the bonds were issued and they put market in the US. And the other example in Nigeria, where the bond was issued, they was all bought by institutions before they even got to the regular diaspora. Because they saw the value of return investment. They didn't have they could have been able to sell more. Senegal recently, I think it was 2 weeks ago, issued the bond, basically. And as a Cameroonian, I would easily buy the Senegalese bond than buy a Cameroonian bond because I trust the Senegalese government more than I trust the Cameroonian bond. So they can also put things there. The last point was on the knowledge and the brain flow. In the legislation, we didn't address education per se. We partly addressed the services. We also addressed the fact that we live in a digital world. And money transfer is managed by remittance, by fintech now. But we know if we require more transparency, we will be able to know exactly how to address the cost, how to be channeled with the fees that they're paying. Segway, fees, I don't want to name any of them, but they manage large amount of money, and we want to continue to partner with them, but we should be able to see, have more clarity in how the fee is structured, and how to be able to help African government reduce also all the regulatory hurdle that they have that triggers the fees. That's what I want to say as a comment. Okay, on education, yes. We don't have any provision on education. But there's a member of Congress School of Cultures back in Congress who wants to do something on education. I will connect you, I think it was the Congresswoman from Virginia. She wants to do a plan on education. But I believe there's already some international programs, like HBCUs are signing partnership with some African universities and Caribbean universities. Those are one of the avenues you can consider. And also look at the visas and migrations. We have very clear example right now, all the TPS visa that are cancelled. We have all those Asian American in our district in Florida who are nurses. The TPS is suspended. Are they going to go back to Haiti? They need them. So Canada is not trying to attract nurses to address the professional shortage. So African countries want those nurses. So I'm going to create a platform to get Asian nurses to go to Ghana. It might look attractive, but we need them in Chicago and Florida as well, because there's a serious professional shortage. We also need to find ways to invest in Haiti to make sure we create a framework for those Asian women to go back home and work for the community. So the different avenues to explore the professional exchange and make sure we have a brain flow from the US, from Caribbean to Canada and Africa. And it would not necessarily require legislation. We require networking and informed partnership and a strong commitment from the African government and African leaders to engage the counterpart here. The appetite is there, but no. Ghana is one example. It looks very good, people want to go back to party in December, it's fine, it's not enough. But that's why we will help those African Americans, for example, who wants to go back, but they don't trust the system enough. They will need an institution to give them a guarantee that, okay, so at least if they do that, they can feel that they are home part of the economy. They don't have to go to one particular country. They can do a blind investment to Tanzania, to Senegal, on tangible projects and with appropriate security and guarantee. So, but this is the beginning of the conversation. Is you know where to start, where it starts, you know where it ends. The same thing for AGOA. When it started with AGOA 20 years ago, okay, now I'm speaking of my personal capacity, not the views of my boss. So when it was a game changer at that time, and the political environment was conducive for that. At that time, the US was importing their energy needs. They were importing a lot of oil and gas. So in the initial conversation, look at the numbers. 90% of imports under AGOA was oil and gas. When Nigeria became a little bit small, I don't know what it is, 2010. I don't want to say, I'm not going to say it's stable because Nigeria has always been stable. It's just a very vibrant country, very politically, but stable until today. But once the leadership in the US decided to move towards, there was one time, 2005, the CBCF Foundation issued a report about how to break the oil center and engage the Gulf Kidney countries. The strategy was then to how are we going to support the oil and gas producing country to build the economy so that you don't just pump oil to the market, which you create development locally. So, and they start building a local content law, which at that time was very unpopular. Why do you need to go to local content? Why don't you want to go invest in the country and be forced to partner with a local company? And given the fact that Nigeria was the biggest oil exporter, it was like implementing local content was almost like corruption in disguise. But it was the only way we can really force the IOCs to invest locally. All of that will not create jobs. But at least create a platform for all those Nigerian tycoons to merge. They have access to concession now, and they can have access to technology and access to financial partners. Now we see Nigerian company operating French platforms. And just because of local content. So, and then after that, the IOC starts shifting. The policy in the US was being free from foreign aid. Because we were advocating that why do you want to invest in complicated countries in development, unlocking the energy potential, because it was $50 billion revenue per year. If you invest locally, that's big money. So why do you want to do that and why you invest in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East countries? It didn't work, and those countries don't have democracy. So now they move to being free from foreign oil. That was the campaign, free from foreign oil, and we started increasing our import to Africa. So and we start promoting AGOA exports, non-oil AGOA exports. So there was oil and gas, and then also textile. Textile investing in South Africa. They create massive amount of jobs. It was good investment. At least we hiring women there. They process the fabrics there, only 10%. So no African strategy. Very few African countries have a strategy to take advantage of AGOA. Now in 2025, the ministers are coming to Washington. They want AGOA. They want AGOA. They tell me what AGOA is. He is a beautiful woman. They have a strategy. We live in a different geopolitical context. Africa has emerged to see a country to continental market. You should be coming here advocating for support for continental investment, support for FTA agreement with continental, helping African continent with CFTA to integrate faster. That's giving opportunity for American businesses because we have technology for cross-border processing. If you have investment in infrastructure, building roads. So AGOA is still in discussion. We don't know, hopefully they will review it, but to me, in current geopolitical context, AGOA is less relevant than CFTA. It's less relevant by having policy of self-reliance. President Trump is a major policy, America first, okay, place is hard, it's good, but what about Africa first too? So now Africa has an opportunity to talk about Africa first and use the American model. So you want to invest for us, okay, invest in critical minerals. We talk about critical minerals all day. All the conferences talk about critical minerals. Why are you processing it? The only country that have FTA. FTA is very unpopular among Democrats because the union hates that. The free trade agreement. The only country that has free trade agreement in the US is Morocco. Morocco produces 40% of the world's phosphate. Where is it processed? In Morocco. So why don't you can process lithium, all that? If you cannot process it in Congo, okay, maybe move it to Rwanda. I don't like to hear that. Don't do that. So if you cannot process it in Congo, and it's just use one port. You have a bigger corridor. It's brilliant. Billions of dollars. Everybody's happy about that. So what we're having is a process locally. They're going to build a corridor and then get the raw material up to the market. We have 2025, it's an insult. In the post-colonial era, we just exporting raw material from coffee to cocoa to oil and gas. Now we're moving to a clean technology, the world is being digitalized. Africa has always had what the world needs. Before it was agriculture, it's still agriculture, it was energy. Now it's going to go to digital revolution. Where do you get the resources for your cell phone, even for your defense, if it's not the continent? We control 30% of Israel. So how much investment do you have there? So now we have a policy of counter China. Okay, what China does in Africa, it shouldn't be our business. They can do what they want. So what about our own policy? Talking is not a policy. So how much time do you need to go through the IFC process or Exim process to do a transaction? 18 months. By the time you go to the office because you want to export your power expenditure or I don't know what product TFC, China is not loading the timesheet. So it just, we live in a very interesting moment, and then I'll tell all of you that you should be able to be bold. Because this administration, Washington now is ready for bold ideas, even these crazy ideas. Because the leadership is throwing out many stuff. The leadership say, okay, we need to tap the tariff. It looks ridiculous, But in a normal sense, if you want to be a manufacturing industry, you have to produce locally and sell locally. You don't want to import from China. But 20 years ago, they created a global framework. We didn't ask for it. Doha conference is a negotiation agreement, country per country, making sure they're investing in low cost production state. They all invest in China. They issue business credit cards. You are bigger consumers. They produce everything in China that you consume. Build the houses, the labor is coming from Mexico. Right now, you cannot build a house in Houston. Your house in Houston will cost $150,000, it's now $400,000. Why? The labor force coming from Mexico, they're not coming anymore. So everything is international. So it makes sense for them to say, we want to make America first and put the tariffs. But it will take 20, 30 years for America to be built, manufacture, and do. And then what is happening, while we're doing that, the world is aligning. South-South relationship aligning. And that's the biggest gift that we can have, your generation. We didn't have that. Do I agree? You have to come to America, you go to France, you go to London, you don't even have friends in Brazil. Here you are one phone call away from anywhere. You have friends from places where you are living to Nepal. So you have access to information in a second. Everybody, ChatGPT is a monster. So your brain is something that nobody can touch. Brain and your energy, your physical energy. You can compete. Because nobody is here to say, okay, let's just block, let me reduce your brain. No, you put Africa in your room on AI, they producing stuff you cannot even imagine. They only need maybe trust, maybe they give you investment. And that's where the diaspora can be.
I want to, we're right on time, but I wanted to ask if my students had yes.
This question is related to the green and of course to your experts. I know we have instances in the diaspora that are engaged in form of remittances where you go, you want to send money, and you go to them. Let's say small boutiques in the corners, what have we. My question is, we know that the art of sending money is being monopolized by big conglomerates like Western Union and the MoneyGram, all of these ones. Now, in the bill, it says the goal is to reduce the cost of sending money. Okay, how much it costs to send money, which basically means positives out of this is that more money will get into families now than before, right? Now, when this thing is reduced, I know those small businesses that I mentioned, they actually rely on high cost of sending money to survive. Now, when you reduce the cost, how much it costs to send money, do you think those small businesses, diaspora businesses that are sending money, do you think they can survive? You understand what I'm saying? So let's say same wave, for example, which is it's an app you use to send money to West Africa. Let's say the money it costs now $5 for you to send $100 to Senegal, and now we're gonna reduce the cost. Instead of paying $5, now you're gonna pay $2, okay, to send $100 to Senegal. This might not be advantageous to same wave because it's a small business. Might be advantageous to Western Union in MoneyGram.
Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something about the business model.
Yes.
I personally, before going back to Congress, invest in the remittance platform. Let me tell you how the fintech operating. They make profits. Yeah. I'm talking under the authority. I'm not a financial person, I'm just disclosing that. But why they're making money, in the platform they will tell you it's free. But they will partner with Visa, right? They're making money different ways. They're making money in currency exchange. They're making money on the fee. And they're making money on the finance, because the fee itself, I don't think that's where they make the profits. It's the value of the company. By the time same word starts copying, I believe this was our case. a company was valued at maybe $150 million. We didn't have customers. We would have been able to raise a lot of money if you can tell our investors that we have a platform with 20,000 people that are using the platform. Same way with before Same way we came. I'm sure they have access to more capital than we did as African, and I don't think we're the only ones. I met at least 20 African who created a platform, an app for money transfer, but they're not surviving. They have access to more money. So they were easily, the moment you click, we want to do the thing the right way, registering the bank here as a bank. Therefore, you have more regulation. For us to onboard the client, you have to have a lot of information you have to fill out, including social security number. By the time you get the application, you put your name, who is this group? Am I putting my social? I don't know Angel. I have to call that person to know it's me, Angel. They don't. Same way you send the link, in 2 seconds you register. You put your name, your email address, you register. They count you as a member before you even start sending money. I believe, I'm not sure, I'm not saying about the strategy, but if we had that strategy, we would have had millions of Africans on our platform already, and we would have been able to raise money quickly, value the company, and even make more money. And that's how we lost. After a year, the company could compete and then we had to close it. So they make money on those fees, and they make money on the financial side. The same thing for marketplace, Amazon and the rest. You don't make, it costs a lot of money to move one group to another group. They make money on little fees and in between, and the variation of the company. Remember that the story about Jumia, who was called an African company, and they said it's not an African company, they were making money, and they're not doing transaction, because they're making money because of the value of the company, not because of the service or the margin they're making on the profit on transactions.
Yeah, the reality is that technology changes, quite dramatically. The positive is that, Africa has this tradition of absorbing technology very, very fast. And in some cases, in many cases, leapfrogging, right? So M-Pesa was the first to introduce digital transfer payments in the world. Kenyans were traveling around educating, the Europeans and the Americans on the technology, and they subsequently, adopted, et cetera. But there's a big challenge, right? Under this sort of technology where you have the blockchain, right? Where transfers are within 1 second. It's not T plus 1 day or T plus 3 days, it's T plus 1 second. And those transfers are free, right? So, you have two scenarios. One is you adapt and introduce a different, model, or you basically shut down, right? So what we're seeing is, some of the money transfers are now into data, right? So they collect a lot of data. They use that data to introduce additional services. Western Union has an insurance product. They have a members club of 30, 40 million people. They survey those people to see if there are other services that they can provide for a fee. So you have diversification of the business model that, for those who can and will survive. But the blockchain is here. And now you have an administration that is, very, very pro stablecoin, right? And that is going to change dramatically how money is transferred. Some will not, many won't survive. Some will survive because they'll have the ability to make adjustments. On the question of, HBCUs playing a role in skills development, I think we're already there. Maybe it's been underreported. I was involved with the African Association of Business Schools, where they share, information, case studies among the various, I can't remember how many schools are involved, maybe about 50 schools are involved. And they are connected to American business schools as well, and sharing information around case studies, lessons to learn what is transferable, what's not transferable to emerging markets. I think the digital world, as Angela was saying, is here, and people are acquiring skills in that fashion. They may be missing sort of the physical, experiential of being, on campus, et cetera, but the vicariousness of the experience is quite significant. Again, Africans have, particularly the youth, have adopted, blockchain and digital businesses in a very dramatic way. And there's several millionaires who are not even 20 years old who are creating content for YouTube and Facebook and making money. And then, social media has been a huge boon for this youth. So yes, government may have policies to create jobs in agriculture and manufacturing, whatever. These kids are already making money digitally, and creating virtual corporations. And now with AI, that's a whole different ballgame. Not even have billionaires sitting, right outside the village with their phones, managing several different corporations all over the continent, doing different content for different clients. I actually have a story just to close it. I was in Gabon. First, I was extremely disappointed in Gabon because given all the oil and everything, you had potholes every 2 or 3 meters, and unfinished buildings, and in the capital. Huh? I don't think Gabon. No, but Gabon is a rich country. They have oil, and then before that they had timber. But anyway, it was a European Union project, and then this diaspora returnee, created an incubator for teaching young kids tech, and he was teaching them how to program. These kids had contracts with Meta, jointly with some programmers out of Poland, and they were making huge amounts of money on these contracts. And that falls outside of the official reporting. These activities. I was really impressed with the level of skill and their understanding. They had a chart on a painted wall, and they were drawing diagrams of how they were going to manage the data and solutions that they were sharing with their Polish counterparts. Yeah, it was very impressive. Very, very impressive.
Okay, I'm gonna give Yao the opportunity to ask his last question. That's your question too? Oh, sorry. Yao and Zeros. Okay.
Thank you. So, I was thinking when we drafted the diaspora engagement policy in Ghana, one thing that we had to be aware of was that how for example, the diaspora, your generation, my generation, as well as the Gen Zs, they all have different modes of engaging the motherland. So I'm also thinking in terms of remittances, the reasons why your generation, my generation would send money would be different from the reasons why, these upcoming young generations would do that. So in relation to that, with regards to the bill, do we have different modes of engaging these different populations and then getting them to actually buy into the bill or buy into the act?
That's your job.
There we go. There we go.
Give me an assignment.
Thank you. I'll report back to you.
Thank you. I think sort of like a two-tiered question. The first one is to simplify the tax incentive. I know as it's currently structured, the burden would be on the administrative side on the IRS. Would it, or how feasible would you see the possibility being of simplifying the tax incentive and converting the deduction into a tax credit for certified investment transfers as opposed to overall initial intention and use? So that's the first one. The second one is for African countries, how would you recommend they take advantage of the Act? From your perspective, what opportunities do you see there for African governments, companies to leverage the opportunities that the Act might be able to help bring? Thank you.
The answer is very simple. All the African governments have a diaspora initiative. Some of them have diaspora commission at the highest level possible, some of the presidency of foreign affairs. But the policies is to their advantage, they have to advocate for it. Same thing when they come to Washington to advocate for AGOA, they come to Africa to advocate for AIDA. This is my hope, because all the policies happening in Washington, and the stakeholders, as always, the think tank, the civil society, the private sector, and also the African government. Something, all of them are coming here with their interest. If Nigerian wants to have the ability to market the bonds here, or wants to create a platform for the African, for the Nigerian diaspora, for example, when they come here, they should have the document. When they talk to the administration, the White House, the think tank, and Congress, like they do, they want to advocate for aid, advocate for agricultural program, for food aid, and for or even FTAs. Some countries, they want to have an FTA with the US. South Africa, certain countries started one collapsed. Egypt had a negotiation collapsed. Tunisia wanted one. Kenya had a commitment in making to bilateral relations. The same way when they come advocate to the policy, they should advocate for the diaspora. But they all talk about it. They all want to come here and say more diaspora, but at least this one is tangible. Thank you.
Well, we've come to the end. I really appreciate those of you who stayed with us. And I want to once again thank our two experts who have really shared a wealth of knowledge and information with us and engaged us in really a fruitful, I think, dialogue and discussion around these issues. So thank you so much to Ms. Thank you so much. Oh, yes, we need a group picture. Theo. Oh, would you like?
End stream.